HTML and CSS are the foundation for the web. So in today's video, we'll take a look at the Builderius interface and see how Builderius allows us to write good HTML. Remember that good HTML is an important recipe for accessibility, for search engine optimization, for good structure, and for performance. If that's something that interests you, let's jump right in. So here we have a typical web page created in the Builderius interface. Whenever you create a page or a template in Builderius, it comes with three sections. We have the header, the main, and the footer. Basically, the header contains your site-wide content that provides introductory or navigational links. So we typically have a site logo, we will have a navigation, we can also have a search tool. Then within the main is where we have your general content that is primarily for the page. What is in the main content does not repeat on other pages. Each page has unique content in the main. Then we have the footer section, which typically contains all of the repeating content that appears at the bottom of the page, and it identifies common information which include things like your copyright, your accessibility statement, privacy policy, and any other supplementary links that you want to repeat on every page. So this is a typical structure that we have, and you can easily find your structure by looking at the navigator at the right hand of your builder. The navigator contains three tabs. The first tab is called the Elements tab, and it shows you the HTML structure. The second tab is called Selectors, and that shows you every CSS that has been applied to the page or globally. Then finally, we have CSS Variables tab, and that just shows us all of the CSS variables that we created in the root. HTML, like any other language, has some guiding rules and is constantly evolving. The same way you have with your languages, English, French, Spanish, Arabic, Hebrew, and any other language, they all have different rules and they have new words that are added to them regularly. Same thing with HTML. It has rules and it has new and evolving documentation. We typically have dictionaries for your different languages. So also in HTML, we have what we call the HTML Living Standard. So I'll leave a link in the description to some documentations that you can go ahead and read on your leisure time to understand a few different rules as well as different elements that are used in HTML. So the first one, like I mentioned, is the HTML Living Standard, and it basically describes different HTML and what you need to know in the HTML. So what are the things that are allowed as child contents of the element? What are the attributes that are allowed on the element, and so on? We also have ARIA in HTML because accessibility and semantic HTML, they go hand in hand, but they can have some slight differences. So first you need to understand the basic HTML structures. Then you can see how that HTML is translated into accessibility related terms, because the HTML creates what we call the DOM. And then we have on the parallel, the accessibility object model, the AOM. So those documents will try to explain things to you so you can just go through them on your leisure time. You can also go through the WCAG guideline for accessibility, and one other one I like a lot is the MDN docs. It tends to explain things and gives examples and so on. So you can check out those documents. For example, from the Living Standard, you can get to understand what are the kinds of content that exist. So you know what is allowed as a child element of other elements and so on. For example, you can see first, almost every element is composed as a flow content. And they give you, once you hover over the illustration, it tells you all of the allowed elements that are regarded as flow content. If you hover over the heading content, it tells you that we have H1 to H6 and the age group. For sectioning content, there are actually only 4 elements. We have article, aside, nav, and section. So you might get confused and think that a div is a sectioning element, but that in reality is not true. So your divs, your header, your main, your footer, they are special elements. They are not actually called sectioning elements, at least in semantic HTML. Then we have what we call phrasing content. Phrasing content typically are your inline elements. So that's elements that are combined together to form paragraphs. So you can have your abbreviations, your images, because they can be put together in line inside of a paragraph to form a full sentence. Then we have interactive elements. Those are mostly things that the end user can interact with. So your links, your buttons, your form elements, and so on. So you can get to understand different HTML elements, and it will also tell you what elements can be put as children of other elements. For example, a paragraph element cannot be put inside of a heading element. So you cannot have something like a p tag inside of a heading. Ideally, you shouldn't have a div inside of a span. So all of those things are mentioned within these documents, but sometimes they might be hard to find. So I will treat them like a dictionary where you go and you consult it when you have a need. Okay, so now let's go back to the builder and see how we can add elements within build areas. So within the build areas, first you have your navigator, and then I'm going to highlight the main tag. Say I want to add a section with some content inside of my main content area. What do? So first, I've highlighted the main content area, and now I'm going to add elements. To add elements, there are 2 ways you can do it. First is the general way, which is by going to your elements inserter, which is on the top left of your screen. It is titled Elements with a plus. If I click on it, it opens up the Elements panel. And then the first thing you get treated to is a search. So you can quickly search for an element if you are like me, who struggles to see the screen sometimes and get overwhelmed when there are lots of content. So I can simply search for a section. And then if you're a keyboard user, you can just press the tab key and you get into your section. Then if you're a mouse user, you can use the mouse and just hover and click. If you're inserting only a single element, then you can just click or press enter. And what happens is that the element is inserted as a child of whatever was first selected. So the main tag was selected, the section becomes a child of the main tag, and what gets highlighted is the last element that was added, which is the container. However, if we want to add multiple elements at once, then you just need to hold the Shift key. So if I go back to the Elements inserter, and I want to add maybe 2 divs, I can just scroll down to the divs, hold the Shift key, and press the div by clicking. So now what happens is the parent container is still highlighted, and every element I add is added as a child of that parent container. But going back and forth between the element inserter and the navigator can be quite tedious. So they have provided us a nice handy toolbar on the right-hand side just after the element structure. So now we have some icons which show us the favorite elements that we typically use on our web page. Starting at the bottom, we have a section, then a container, a div, heading, paragraph, image, link, and then the collection element. So that's a nice handy toolbar that we can quickly insert elements. It's like a quick access toolbar. and the elements there are not fixed. You can remove and add elements as you see fit. To add or remove an element, all you do is head over down to the bottom right of your screen. You see the cog icon for your settings. If I click on it, then it adds an X icon before each of the icons that are in the quick access toolbar. So if I want to remove any of them, I can just click on the X icon and it gets rid of that element. But I like the elements as they are. Now, if you want to add an element into that favorites panel, all you do is go over to your inserter on the left-hand side of your screen. And let's say I'm looking for a list element. All I have to do is hover over the list element. Then I'll see a star icon that appears on the element. And then I can click on that star and it makes it a favorite. So now we have the element at the top for our list. One improvement that I will wish that they add is an ability to rearrange the elements, because right now it is added in order that you put it. So if you want to rearrange them, you may need to delete everything and then start from scratch. But in this case, I'm happy with the way it is structured, so I'll leave it that way. So now let's say I want to add maybe a heading, a paragraph, and maybe some buttons into my first div. So I have my first div highlighted. I'll hold the Shift key, then I'll click on the H icon for heading, then a paragraph, and then maybe a div block. Then I will, still holding the Shift, click on the div, and now I want to insert maybe 2 link elements. So I have my first structure. I'll click on the last div and add my image. So I have a typical structure that you will have in a hero section. For now, always remember to save. So I'll just click on the save button to save it to the development branch. So now we have our elements. We can now start adding our content. To add your content, all you just do is click without holding the Shift key. Just click on any element you want to add content to. So let's say the heading. I'll click on it. And then it opens up the settings panel on the left-hand side. First, we have the title, which is called heading. For now, we can actually rename these elements directly from that title. So if I click, I can rename it from heading to something else, maybe title. And it also rename in the structure panel. Next, we have 2 tabs. We have the content tab for everything that is related to the HTML. So the HTML tag, attributes, and the inner content of the HTML is all set up from the content tab. Then we have the style tab, which controls all of our CSS styling. Okay, so let's go back to the content tab. And let's say I want to change the HTML tag to maybe an H1 or an H2 or anything. So I can go down to the bottom and make it an H1. And that becomes an H1. Ideally, I think probably it should be better that the heading tag should be closer to the actual HTML tag. I'm not sure. Let me know what you think in the comments. But now we've set it up to H1. Then the next thing I'll do is change the heading to maybe David is good. Okay, so we have our inner content. We can change the heading level. We can even change the HTML tag. If I just click on the drop down, which is one of the cool features about Builderias, every element can be converted to other elements. So let's say for whatever reason, I was using the H1 to H6 and I wanted to change it to something else. I can just click and change it to maybe a P tag. Now it's a P tag. Can go back to the H1 to H6, the heading elements, and I'm back down to the heading elements. So you can literally switch between elements as you wish. So that's just one cool feature. Then we can also add attributes. To add attributes, just simply go down to the bottom. You see the attributes accordion. If I toggle it open, I can now add any attribute I want as a repeater. So I can click the plus icon to add new attributes and say maybe the first attribute is, for whatever reason, let's say an ARIA label. ARIA label is David is not good. You shouldn't do this, because what is going to happen that the ARIA label will replace what is the visible content. And so a screen reader user will be hearing something, whereas a visual user will be seeing something else. So try to avoid changing the semantic naming of an element unless you absolutely have to. I'll save it. And we can now preview on the front end. So here we are on the front end. If I right click, choose to inspect, you see how clean the HTML is, that there is no attribute added that I don't have control over. So we have section, we have a div with data container equal to true, and then a class equal to container. This is a typical structure that we normally have, but we can actually change it if we don't want that class and attribute. Then we have a div, the h2, ARIA label. Everything is as clean as we need it to be. Okay, so if I go back, so that's it for the HTML side of things. If you are a pro user, one added advantage you have is that you can actually choose to have an element that does not exist on the list. So let's say you wanted to add like a field set. The field set element does not exist, but you can now create a new element on the fly. So I can create that element, especially maybe you are trying to make your form accessible, like your radio buttons. You want to make your group of radio buttons accessible using the field set and legend. You can do that. Even though the builder does not support it yet, a pro user always has access to control everything. And speaking of the class name that was added to the container, let's now go over to the style tab. So I'll go over to the container, and now we'll get to learn about the CSS and the styling. With Builderias, you've seen that we have good control over the HTML. We also have good control over the CSS. And they give us 3 different ways that we can style an element depending on your need. In the free version, you have 2 ways. In the pro version, you have 3 ways. The first way is by adding CSS locally, and that will create a randomly generated class name. So let's say you are not very good at naming. Most of us are not that good at naming elements. So that will now create a randomly generated class name for you and apply the style to that locally auto-generated class name. The other way is to add global styling. So that means you want to add some CSS that applies globally across multiple pages. Then in the pro version, you have what you call template level styling. So you can now apply your classes only to a specific template. So the styles will only be loaded on that template, not everywhere. So those are the 3 ways, and we'll see how it's done. So coming back to the container, we can see if we go over to the styles tab that we have local selected by default, but then we also have .container. So the local is your local level styling. The container is a global style. So you can see once I clicked on the container, you see some dots that are appearing after some of the accordion items. That means we've applied some styles to those specific portions. If I go over to sizing, we can see what exactly was the size, which is 100%. Then if I go over to spacing, you can see that it added auto to the left and right margins. All of these things can be changed, which is one important thing about Builderias compared to other builders. Some other builders, they have those class names, but changing them can be quite difficult. But with Builderias, every class name that has been added by Builderias, you can remove them, you can rename them, you can change them. And like I mentioned about the data attribute as well, if I come back to the content, you can see data container set to true. That's just an attribute that was added by Builderias to help us in styling containers if we wish. So you can go back to the style tab. Let's go ahead and see the CSS generated, but let me first apply a local style. So let me go ahead and close the class. It returns back to local styling. And now let's say I'll apply a background color. So let's go to the backgrounds, and I'm just going to apply a random background color of hot pink. And we can go over to the front end. So I'll save and go over to the front end. Now let me go ahead and inspect the page to see how the CSS was applied. So right click and inspect. Then I'll go over to the container, and you see how the CSS was applied. First, we have the more specific CSS, which is the background color hot pink, and that is applied using a two-class specificity, because the idea is that the local styles should always override global styles. So to achieve that, they apply a two-class specificity with a randomly generated class name. But then for the global styles, those are the way you put it is what is going to be outputted. So we have a one-class specificity and is applying that style for us. So that's it for the global styling. This method is available to both the pro and the free users. So now let's look at some other things that you get access to as a free user. And that is, you can actually style complex selectors. To style a complex selector, just go over to the Selectors tab on your navigator. And there you can see every selector that has been applied globally to the page. So these are global CSS that have been applied. Most of them are from the framework from Builderius. And the thing is that you can change any of that CSS. It is not restricted. So if I click on root, I can go ahead and see everything that was applied to the root. So we can see there is nothing really on the root. So we can go over to other ones. Let's say the H1. Let's see if there's any CSS applied. Okay, so we have CSS variables. So some variables were applied to the H1. Same thing with other ones. You can always see any of them, and you can always search in case it is too overwhelming. You can search. So let's say I want to search for H1. You see the styles were applied to H1. The search uses fuzzy logic. So that means anywhere H1 appears, it will show us so that we know exactly everywhere H1s were styled. So we can see that we have styles for H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, which we can always change because everything is changeable. We can always see it and change it. And we can also create our own complex selectors. So for example, let's say I want to style something like body P. I know it doesn't really make that much sense, but yeah, we can style it. And you see that it now says you want to create a new one. So you can either press enter or you click on the new. Either way will generate that new selector. Then on the left-hand side, you now notice that the title is now called body space P, which is the name I created. You can now go ahead and add any style you want, like let's say the paragraph should have a typography font size of 6 rem. You can see all of my body P tags have 6 rem, but we don't need that. Let me just delete it. And you can change any of the selectors. You also have access to CSS variables. So I click on variables. You can see any of the variables that were created and change them. So let's say I want to change all of my color variables. I just search for color. So these are all the tabs that have colors applied to them. So for example, I'll go to color itself and I can now change any of my colors. If I want to change the base color, I can change it. Base 100, I can change it, and so on. So you have access to everything that was created in Builderius. So now that's it for the free version. The pro version takes it a step further. With the pro version, you now have access to what we call template level styling. Because I showed you local styling and global styling in the free version. But in the pro version, if I select any element like the container, I can now go over to selectors and then switch from global to template. And now you see that it changes. So these are the styles that have been applied on a template level. And actually, there are no actual styles applied because none of them has a dot, because usually any one that has styles applied will contain a dot. So template level styling, there is no dot. But now I can come back to any element I want. For example, I can go back to maybe my H2. Then I'll give it a class name of maybe hero _ heading. Let's switch it to an H1 first. And I can now do any kind of styling I want. I can change maybe the font size again to 8 rem. And that changes the font size, but only on a template level. Globally, it will still remain at the default value that was set globally, but just on a template level, this new CSS has been applied. So that can help with performance. Let's say you have some sections that you only want to apply CSS to those sections on that page, not everywhere on the website. So you can either use the local styling or the template level styling, and you save yourself having to have all these unused CSS on multiple pages that don't get used ever. So that's it for the first bit that is only for Pro version. And then the second bit for the Pro version is that you also have access to, let me go back to the selectors and global. You have access to applying your CSS in code, because a lot of us prefer to write code than to be struggling with the UI. So if you want to apply CSS in code, you simply go over to selectors, and then you'd choose the selector you want. Right now, I'm selecting the hero _ heading. Then there is an option that says CSS. When I click on that CSS, you can now see every CSS that have been applied to the selector. At the moment, because I was applying that CSS on a template level, but I'm checking for it on a global level, that's why it is showing blank. The moment I switch back to the template level, we can now see the CSS that was applied to the template. So I wish Builderers will have a way to indicate when we are styling template level versus global level, but it works. But there is no visual indicator. So hopefully Builderers team can add some visual indicators, but we can see all of our CSS. The other nice bit is that we can now see every CSS that we applied, because right now we're only checking. Let's go ahead and just select one, like the container. And let me select the container itself. Selectors, see I'm on the global. You can see selector means that I'm selecting whatever element or selector there at the top is what is being replaced with this selector keyword. And then we have all of our CSS. If I want to see every CSS that has been applied across the page, I'll simply click on all CSS. And then I can see every CSS that have been applied to the global specifically. If I want to see every CSS applied to the template specifically, I'll click on template, and that shows me every CSS that was applied only on the template level. And there we go. So that's it for the Pro version versus the free version. But that doesn't make you limited if you're a free version user. Free version users can still apply CSS. You're not really restricted. So let's say, for example, container. I know some people might worry that only Pro version users can apply some random CSS, like maybe padding block and for rem, something like that. You'll be thinking that only the Pro users can apply CSS that is not available in the UI. That is not the case. They still give you accommodation for free users. What I mean by that is, let's delete that CSS. I'll come back to the UI version. And let's say I want to still apply that CSS that doesn't exist yet. I can still do that. As a free user, you can head over to the bottom. We have the advanced option under your styles. So I go to the advanced option, There is where I can define any kind of CSS property that is not available in the UI. So I can say new property, padding block for, and I still get the same thing. If it's not available in the UI, let me go ahead and save and refresh. If I go back to that container and I make sure I choose the container, if I go down to the bottom, advanced, you see the CSS is still there. But however, if it is a CSS that is available in the UI and you just wanted to apply it in the advanced tab, it will allow you to apply it, but then it will port it over to the right UI element for you. So if I create a new property and say something like maybe margin top to rem, now this exists in the UI. So if I save it and refresh, go back to my container, the style tab, and advanced, make sure I select the class. You see that it is now showing up properly. But then if I go over to spacing, you see that that to-rem has been ported over to the UI interface. Now, here is another nice feature that comes with Builderias, is the fact that you can easily see the unit if you want to see the unit, but you can also write the unit yourself. When you click into the input, it gives you back that unit, so you can type whatever you want. You're not restricted to any specific unit like pixel, EM, rem, or anything like that. You can type in any unit you want. So I can say something like 2CH. Once I go away, you can see the unit easily and see the number. You can also write any kind of unit you want. So for example, instead of writing 2CH, let's say I want to write maybe calc 2 times 4 rem. I can do that as well. It will also work. If you want to unlink, because right now it's linked all 4 sides, you can just click on the link icon. It unlinks, and then you can change one part at a time. So that's something else. Then finally, we don't want to be writing all of these elements manually. We prefer to use variables. So there are 2 ways you can add variables. Let me get rid of the elements first. You can either use your mouse to click. So if you hover over any unit, you see a plus icon at the top left. If I click on it, it shows me all of my variables, and it has that fuzzy logic searching. So if I want to search for something like size, it will tell me all of the elements that have size in them. If I want to search for maybe color for some reason, it will show me all of the colors. If I want to even search for error, it also shows me all of the variables that are termed error. It doesn't have to be specific in the order it was written. Just any word you remember in the variable or the class name, it will find it for you. So that's that. I can delete, but let's just get rid of everything here and return it back to normal. Okay, the advanced tab, make sure I remove the padding block. Just want to return everything to normal. So I believe that's normal now. You can save it. And yeah, that's it for most of the styling. So that's just a brief overview of how you can use Builderias to add your HTML and CSS with any data attributes, any elements tag, and so on. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please do leave a thumbs up. It will help me know that you are enjoying the video. Write in the comments, what part of the video did you enjoy? What part would you want me to explain further? And we'll go on from there. The next video, which will be popping up on the screen somewhere now, is going to be talking about templates. So stick around for that.